and get us going. Welcome everybody to the 3 o'clock Pacific time slot for the Peralta Online Equity Conference here in the year 2024. We're happy to have you all here. We are about to hear from Dr. Treya Allen from University of Arizona and other higher ed institutions in that state, like Pima Community College. And before we do, I'd like to just run through a few housekeeping details so that we can all find our way to the restrooms and all that good stuff. First, captioning. If you would like to use captions for this session, you just have to go down to the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window and select the caption button, or it might be hiding under another button that says more with an image of 3 dots. Once you click that more button, a menu pops up and captions is one of the menu options. Just select that and turn the captions on. Next, we love to have interactive sessions. And so if you are inspired to make a comment, ask a question, the chat is there for that purpose. Please share away, and we hope that you will consider giving us your resources that you know about and all kinds of good things. Last, we are recording this. Welcome to all of you watching the recording right now. We're glad that you're here asynchronously. And if you choose to join us in real time and use your voice, just know that it will be captured in this recording. So you are welcome to use the chat and I can read your question for you. And those types of ways around that if you do not want to be seen or heard. So, Treya, thank you for being here. We're so grateful for you to contribute to our conference. I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the group and then get us started.
Awesome. So can I introduce myself as a part of my presentation because I do this already? Okay. Can you do me a favor and give me a thumbs up if you can see this beautiful screen? And you can use the Zoom emojis down below as well. I just want to make sure everyone has, okay, awesome, awesome, awesome. It looks like at least enough of you. So this cute little presentation is called Mapping Equity. And it came as as a response to communicated student need that we've been hearing for a very long time, that was amplified at the onset of the pandemic here in the contiguous United States, well, just around the world. But essentially, this is where this comes from. And so I want to explain really quickly 2 things. One, the slide deck is from Pima Community College because this is where this work took place. It's where the work kind of took birth. But I work at the University of Arizona, and I'm also an instructor at 2 other institutions, one Widener University back east, and also Pima Community College here. So if you're like, why are the slide decks not matching up with Arizona red and blue? It's because the work came from Pima. I like to start all my presentations by introducing my intersections and kind of my positionality. My name is Dr. Treya Allen. I say my whole name on purpose because for those students who I may interact with, they need to know not only that can you look like this and be a doctor and have your name that looks like this and be a doctor, but it's also important for them to know that I finished. So I have the honor of serving at the University of Arizona full-time as the General Education, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Focused Faculty or Instructional Support Coordinator. And all that means is that I help faculty members kind of reimagine what their courses could be with materials, curriculum, and implementing them well so folks feel like they belong. And we're actually practicing inclusion beyond checklist, right? I'm also a part-time faculty or part-time instructor at Widener University and Pima Community College. And my teaching centers around these subjects, so African American studies, psychology, civic engagement, the general education experience here at the University of Arizona, which is like an introduction to gen ed, and our learners' position as learners and autonomy for that. And then of course, student success and development. I'm also a mom, a Mimi, a sister, a colleague, a friend, But my favorite role in the entire world is that of a Mimi, and that little boy down in the bottom corner made me a Mimi, and I love him more than I love my kids. And they completely understand and know this, so it's not shocked, and they're not shocked when I say these things in a presentation. But what I wanted to kind of come here and focus a little bit on is this idea of multimodal courses and what those exactly are. How do we get there? What's the purpose of them? Those sorts of things. So let me just tell you where we're going. I want us to be able to define by the end of this session what those are, describe barriers to learner participation, whether that's in current classes or classes that we are thinking about, past, present, and future, if you will. I'd also like to discuss the appropriateness of multimodal courses, and I guess start here with saying it's completely okay if they don't work for you. But even if it doesn't work for you, what I'm describing here, perhaps a strategy will, and a strategy as we're working towards equity, because we never really land there. We're always working towards equity. Questions, comments, and concerns? And Kevin, really quickly, I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare because I think that there is something going on with the slide deck that is incorrect.
No
It
problem.
doesn't matter. We're gonna roll with it. I was like, oh, that is not the order that I put those slides in, but all is well. Okay, so back to this process. So in here, as we're learning together, as Kevin said, please feel free to put things in the chat, react with Zoom emojis, any and everything. I'm completely open. This is a learner space, and I want you all to feel as comfortable discussing and talking about these things, or just stopping me if you have a question because you've never seen whatever it is that I'm about to show you before. So just want to check really quickly. Everyone can still see my screen now that I've okay, cool beans. All right, so let's start here. And I think it's really important for me to tell the truth about things. The emotional journey of creating anything great. This graphic is from John Saddington. And essentially, this is like what happens when you go to a conference and you hear something that's really great, or you have this wonderful idea in the middle of the night and you're talking about it and you're like, man, I'm going to do this. This is the best idea ever. And then quickly you start off with the best idea, and it quickly like progresses to, gosh, this is going to be harder than I thought. Or the realization that your simple idea is going to require more work. Or even if you're like me and you get down to the dark swamp of despair and you use a couple of explicatives about it, for some of us, we'll be able to go from this is a lot of hard work to it's okay, but it still sucks. But if you're a realist like me, oftentimes I'm like, gosh, this sucks and I have no idea what I'm doing. This propensity to like second guess yourself. And usually that happens to me at like 1 p.m. But somehow you make it out of that, right? And then you get to it's okay, but it still sucks. Or you even like go a little bit further than that and you're like, okay, let's call it a day. We've done a lot of good stuff. I don't want to chance it. I don't want to like think that I don't want to like pull myself into an area where I'm back into like the murky swamp of despair. Finally, you get out of that and you're like, wow, this is great. Or even like, this is one of the best accomplishments of my life. I start here because whenever we're talking about new ideas, it is easy to go from, oh my gosh, this is amazing, to, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And I can't even believe y'all let me do this to myself. All of this is very typical. And it's typical not of just this process, but any learning process, especially when you're gung-ho and you have people who are cheerleading you, like, yeah, Treya, that's a great idea. And then you get home at night and you're like, gosh, what was I thinking? The same thing happens for multimodal courses and multimodal learning. So I want to start with just a really quick waterfall activity. And so in the chat, if you'll do me a favor, I'm going to ask you these 2 questions. You're not going to hit submit yet, but let's go with the first question, which is, what is multimodal? Let's say courses because slide deck switched up on me. But what are multimodal courses? Okay, and so you can right now. You got 10 seconds to put it in the chat. Do not hit submit until I say go. But what do you think multimodal courses are? Okay, so in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go ahead and hit respond or submit it. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of similarities in answers. So let's do the second one waterfall question, which are, what does a multimodal course require? And so you'll have about 15 seconds to answer that. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes, so I'm seeing a lot of hardworking, consistent effort, flexibility, careful alignment. I cannot tell you how important that is. Multiple pathways in lighting up the runway for students, varying types of ways to participate, awareness of technology deficits, absolutely carefully integrated planning. So 2 things I want to say to you really quickly. This should say multimodal courses. And so whenever you see this in the next couple of slides, just substitute learner for courses. But I also want to talk to you really quickly about intentional language use. So I try my hardest, even though it's not going to be displayed in this presentation, that we use the word learner for student, because what that does is it recognizes that anybody who's in that learning space, instructor included, is going to be a learner. And if you are any sort of instructor at all, you recognize really quickly, you have those days where you realize, goodness, I realize I don't know as much about this as I think I do. Or you have learners who are in your presence who are like a little bit more advanced than you. The second thing I want to kind of point out here is that we intentionally use the word instructor instead of faculty. And that is because there is a hierarchy when you use the word faculty. So I never introduce myself as an adjunct professor. I'm just a professor who works part-time. I don't care, argue with your mom. And that is because over the years, the legitimization of who can be considered a professor is wrapped up into titles. So if you are in this room and you teach, whether it is part-time, full-time, whether you are tenured, career track, whether you are dabbling in it for the first time, or you've been here for 15,000 years, to not call you an instructor and just to label you as faculty almost like erases and negates the experience that you do have walking into that space. So even though this PowerPoint presentation is not the one that I carefully curated today, we'll still be okay, but you'll hear me say these words. Okay, so moving right along, I want to tell you that multimodal learning in this instance is the same as high flex classrooms. And for some of y'all who are at San Francisco State University, this particular multimodal courses or classrooms actually started on your campus in about 2005. I cannot remember, well, I remember the brilliant person who did this, but now they run EduCause. So look them up and look up their work. But the label of high flex or hybrid flexible course is reserved for courses that host 2 learning modalities for 1 course. So you're not building another course. You usually have a face-to-face component and an online option. And the facilitator of said courses have to support student choice between learning environments. So students can choose anytime. Today I'm going to be in class in the face-to-face, or learners can choose anytime that they are going to be in the face-to-face version or the online version. In fact, this presentation, y'all. And instructors support that regardless of how the student or how the learner chooses. And then regardless of the participation modality, learning outcomes are the same for all learners. So it doesn't matter how they participate, when they participate, the learning outcomes are the same. You're not building two classes, you're building one course, and you're hosting it over two different modalities. Now, the components of high flex courses require flexible participation, right? So flexibility these days seems like a curse word, depending on who you're asking in that institution. Multimodal course delivery, meaning there's going to have to be a face-to-face and then an online option of some sort. One of the other, I have done this where I have 4 modalities going on at one time. That's not a brag at all. It's a lot of work. Let me just be very clear. They're student driven. So students have the choice to elect how they participate, and students determine how they will participate. So they're not asking for permission at all from the instructor. The learner will always get to decide how they want to participate. And there's some things there, right? So usually there's this power demographic in the course room where the instructor sets the parameters. Here, the learner is actually saying, this is how I'm choosing to participate today. And then finally, these courses are typically technology enhanced. And one of our senior technologists here from our University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Learning is also here in this room. Cheryl, if you'll just wave to folks, because if you have tech questions, I wanted to have the expertise in the room with me. At PIMA, we have several face-to-face modalities, hybrid, which is students meet one day a week, and then the rest of their courses and course materials are online. You have your traditional in-person, face-to-face in a room with boundaries. There's virtual in-person courses which happen asynchronously. And then there's the self-paced in-person where students come and they learn in like a computer lab and they do it at their own pace. Sorry, y'all. The slides are throwing me. Online modalities typically are online asynchronous or online A. There's no expectation of a live meeting with an instructor, or there's no expectation of a live meeting at any time. Then there's also virtual synchronous, which also counts as an online modality. And then you have your self-paced independent. So learners can kind of walk through this in their own pace and do what they want to do as long as they finish by a specific date. At PIMA, when we were going through this and trying to figure out, okay, well, what is our definition of what a high flex course would be? We ended up deciding, Brian is the person's name. I just can't remember their last name at San Francisco State. But we decided to kind of mirror the high flex definition as close as possible because it just made sense. But we said at PIMA that it's going to be delivered multimodal learning environments that allow learners to choose how they'll participate at a specific time interval. It assures the same learning outcome across all modalities. And of course, there's continuous instructor support for the learner, for the learner's selection of how they will learn. What we found really quickly is that a lot of instructors, when I was like actually teaching them how to put these courses together, they'd say, oh, I'm doing this already, right? But when we put it into a matrix to kind of help folks understand that the flexibility of participation and the modes of learning must be there in order for it to be a true high flex course. So what that looked like is we were like, okay, so who has the flexibility of participation? If it's students, but it's a single mode, then that's a transformative course, but not necessarily a high flex course. But if it's a student and there's multiple modes of instruction, then that is indeed a high flex course. What instructors at the time were typically telling us is like, yes, we determine how students or how learners will show up in these spaces, but we are offering them 2 ways to do it. And that is what we refer to as an emergent high flex course, but it's not really high flex at all. So when I thought about like, oh, we have this issue, pandemic is going on, there are barriers to participation. But even prior to that, there were barriers to participation, mainly in flexibility and institutional barriers that we didn't even realize were barriers until learners started telling us about these things. I came in with two areas of focus. And one was to create a flexible learning environment, and that gave learners their choice. And the other one was, how do we build accessible courses? Not access in terms of like UDL, but access in terms of, Dr. Allen, I can't make it to class today. My daughter is sick. And we know that you are immunocompromised, and we don't want to compromise your system. So we'll sit this one out. And it didn't really dawn on folks that while we were so hyper vigilant around screen readers and accessible text and PDFs, that we had students who weren't actually able to access the course itself. And then this pandemic thing happened, right? So when you're thinking about this process, actually, don't think about the process yet. I've said a lot of things, and I just want to pause really quickly to see if anyone has questions, comments, or concerns, or things that they're like, what? Oh my gosh.
It's all sounding good from here.
Okay, cool beans. And thank you, Kevin, for Dr. Brian Beatty. I could not remember this name to save my life. Okay, so two foci, right? Flexible learning environments and accessible courses. When I started thinking about this as an instructor, one of the things, and I said the first one, which is accessibility is not just the universal design for learning, it's also, can my students get to the course? And in a lot of cases, no, they could not, especially when we were talking height of the pandemic and you had caregiver issues, students falling ill, those things. The other thing about high flex courses or multimodal courses is that equivalency must exist, but equivalency is not the same as equality. So equality is everyone gets the same thing. Equivalency is everyone needs to be able to access and have a similar experience, even if they're not in the classroom, they're not in the face-to-face classroom. So the way I explain this is this: there is no way possible that I can duplicate the amazing goodness of y'all being in one of my live in-person classrooms. However, what I can do is make sure that whatever I'm asking you to do, because the learning outcomes are the same, that you have access to all the materials that we use in the classroom. And if that meant I had to pre-record a lecture, which oftentimes I did, to have access to that, as well as technology that would allow you to converse with your peers. So even though it's two modalities, all the students still have to be able to communicate with each other, right? So I want to just bring up really quickly, Kevin makes this really great point in the chat, that even though the pandemic is over, we still have students who cannot physically access a class, not because of disability, but because life is out here lifing for some of our students. And so when designing any course, not just multimodal courses, equity was always the grounding principle for me. It still is, because equity is not something that we achieve. So for some context, within the context of the United States, we have populations who were denied education, or here in the Southwest specifically, Mexican students were left in grades 1A, 1B, and 1C as a way to prevent them from matriculating. So you figure 232 years of inequitous practices in education, we're not resolving that overnight at all. So equity will never, ever, ever be a destination. It will always be a daily practice, always. And then the other thing is this: reusability is key. And I was just reminded of this morning when I was trying to clean up this presentation, and one of my teammates, Katie's in here, like popped into my head and was like, why are you trying to create something from scratch? Reuse what you have. And so the same principle works in these courses as well. You're not designing two courses, you're actually really thinking about what do I have and how can I make that apply across and adjust. So you want to create one, and that's usually for your online course, and then adjust for all your other modalities. So what this looks like in terms of like equity and mapping assignments is that you're going to start with the least live facilitated course. You all will get this graphic. It's a bit more than this graphic organizer. But you're going to start with the online course first because the online course requires you to be so detailed. So in this example, if I want every student to participate in classroom discussions, then the online folks I'll have to figure out the technology for them to be able to do that. I'll have to figure out what the requirements for them participating in that discussion look like and how they're going to participate in feedback loops, right? So in here, they're going to create a feedback loop and respond to one. So that's basically they're going to create a post and respond to other students. And then to help inform that post, they're going to get all the recordings of not just the content, but also the participation, the discussion in course. And then that discussion allows them to better communicate with those who were in the class at the time and those who were outside of the class. Now, one of the things that I get all the time is, well, it just looks like the online learners who participate in the online version of that, they kind of get like a get out of jail free card. It's really, really simple. So remember how I told you, you're going to design once and then apply everywhere. Every single person in this class, even if you're in the in-person session and we have a discussion about the content, everyone has to reply to the discussion board. Everyone, right? So you don't get a pass just because you were in the class, and you don't get to skip out on interacting with peers who were in the class or who were outside of class. Everyone has to reply to that discussion board. So adapt what you have to meet multiple modalities, but start with online learners first. And then regardless of where you are in this process, instruction always drives technology. It is not the other way around. So one of the cool tools that I love to use now is this tool called Perusal, but you have to know what it is you want to do in order to select the correct tool. Otherwise, technology that is just put out there quickly becomes a tool of abuse or a tool that you can oppress with. So it's super important that we consider what are we trying to accomplish, and then what is the technology that we can use. At the time when I did this kind of mapping, I was like, well, we could use the Brightspace discussion board. We could use VoiceThread. Students also, or excuse me, learners could also record and post their sessions as well, right? But now we have other like social annotation tools that allow that to happen quite easily. But for whatever you decide to do, I just want you all to remember the thought of Occam's razor, right? Simplicity is key. Simplicity is key, right? So given these two hypotheses, take a simple one, right? And so that's why I say design for one and then apply it across. How are we going to meet the requirements of the course, and how are students going to be able to participate in ways that make sense for their lives, and then allow them to then move forward in their learning. So I'm going to pause here really quickly to see if there are questions or things that you were wondering about. I thought I saw one. Oh, so Nikki says, I'm interested to learn what tech resources are called for to make a class truly accessible. What are the texts needed for instruction in and the learning in? I hope you will get to this. Yes. So I'm going to tell you this right now. I actually did this with originally a Zoom platform, a second screen, and my laptop, right? I bought all this technology, and I think I got the second screen from like a Goodwill at the time because Amazon was behind and I couldn't get something else. Eventually to that, I added like a Samsung tab 11 or something so that I could demonstrate things. So I would join the Zoom meeting with two of them. And that's just the teaching portion, right? So for students, this is why why Cheryl is here. I highly recommend that you get with your teaching and learning center or your technology center to see what learning platforms that you have. Hackback, Perusal, H5P. I cannot sing the praises of H5P enough because I'm working with it now. These are interactive activities. Play, pause it. You can actually throw in a video and then pause the video and ask questions. Any of those things happen. But in terms of just like instruction or even group work, Perusal works for group work. If you're like, my institution doesn't have Perusal, great, Google Docs. You can socially annotate on Google Docs. It is whatever is the simplest to use as well. So don't get a cute tech piece and not understand how to use it. If you're like, I don't know how Perusal works, that's fine. Use Google Docs. Because Google Docs comments, you can like track the changes, all the things to see. So I hope that answers it, but I'm also willing to kind of um, show you some of the things that I used. It when I tell you it was like it did not cost a lot. It did not cost a lot at all. Um, Absolutely. And then I think Cheryl is putting in our DRC reference. And Cheryl, would you do me a favor and put in UCAT as well, especially the area that you work in, so that you can kind of see what we work with there. And I should also let you know that Pima and the U of A work side by side. So whatever the U of A adopts, Pima attempts to adopt because the majority of their students transfer to the U of A as well. So if you can see it on our website, that's typically, those are the same technology pieces that we use. Um, but I would say ease of access depends on what it is that you're using it for, Nikki, especially if you're like, I want to do group work, great, Google Suite, and you can track the changes. If you're like, I want a way for students to chat with each other, start with your learning management system first. Here we use Brightspace or D2L. Start with what's in there first that students know of, and then move from there is what I would say. So not to belabor the time, let's get into waterfall number 2, student barriers. So we're going to do this one a little bit differently. I know there's 3 questions here, but let's just truncate it down to 2. So pre-pandemic and pandemic, I'd like to know what were some barriers to learner participation in classes. And so again, 15 seconds, and then we're going to post them all together in the chat when I say go. So what were some key pre-pandemic and pandemic barriers to learner participation in classes? And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and post what you have if you have something. Ooh, yes. Introvert personality, technology skill level, imposter syndrome. Kevin, you have to talk with me about that imposter syndrome. Time or necessity to invest in their learning. Oh, the steepest learning curve is when we see new students come to the college or college or university and they don't realize that college is not high school. Illness, yes, time management, fear of failure, lost educational experience due to COVID. Yep, all of those things, all of those things. Desire, absolutely. Okay, so then our second waterfall is this. What are some key current barriers to learner participation in courses? Current barriers to learner participation in courses. About 15 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and submit your time. Time is a big one. Still catching up to learning levels? Possibly. Confidence against judgment. Okay. Learning taking time. So there was something in here about first generation students not understanding unwritten expectations. Okay, Kevin, you gotta come on through here with hidden curriculum. I love it so much. Mental health, absolutely. So I'm using this term, you're going to hear it again, but hidden curriculum, these are all of the ways we expect students to come into, or learners to come into a classroom, knowing the culture and the more ways of the classroom, how things are supposed to be done, how you're supposed to comport yourself in a classroom, what is expected of the teacher, uh, instructor learner dynamic and relationship. All of those things are the hidden curriculum. And I would also just say this, these things are not so much hidden because they've been firmly established since the 19th century. And if you are not carefully and purposefully interrupting the, the ways we believe learners should come into a course room, we are basically perpetuating it. So I got some more stuff in here. Importance of reading to learn. Yep, absolutely. Basic needs. Anonymity of online environment. Look at us without cameras on. LOL. This is not funny, but it kind of is. But it was such a steep learning curve because I could just turn my camera off and turn off my sound. You cannot really do that to a face when you're in a face-to-face meeting with someone at all, especially when someone says something that you're like, what? That doesn't even make no good sense. So that was a very, very steep learning curve for me. I just want to just kind of echo some of the things that you've already said. Pre-pandemic, we saw time management, work, caregiving in some instances, especially at community colleges, illness, course navigation, not understanding how or what was required, stopping out, and then courses not being life accessible, meaning I have to work from 9 to 12. The only time this course is offered is at 10. I cannot get off. So this course is not life accessible to me. I can't take it because I need to support myself. During the pandemic, we saw all of those things. Plus, we had this added trauma, right? So trauma does not necessarily have to be big T trauma, like I was shot, I was in an accident, I've lost someone. What we saw was the loss of social networks. I will tell you, as a result of the pandemic, I lost all notion of time because my home life and work life were bleeding together. I couldn't go out. I also did not like my children very much because I was around them 24/7. They had all moved back home. And it was like, oh my gosh, it's like 3 college kids all the time. The house felt like it was a dormitory. So this idea around trauma is very real. And for some folks, relationships did not survive this at all. And that also was traumatic. Work, caregiving, mental well-being, and I'm using that as a broad term because some of us became really anxious around you know getting this invisible something that no one knew about, and then also the just disconnection. But then post pandemic, when we're looking at all of these, what we're seeing is there's patterns here. Like these things have always been in play, but now we see, in addition to like post traumatic stress and the management of that, there's still anxiety and depression. I think I read a statistic the other day that said 78% of college learners or college students have some mental well-being issue, whether it is anxiety, depression, or just isolation because they just don't have the mental health knowledge to seek help. Unsure of life direction. COVID knocked a lot of us on our behinds, and we were like, what do I do with this? So imagine being like a traditional age or a re-career who has to come back to school in order to like move on with life, but just not sure where they're gonna go. work-life obligations. All of these things are barriers to student participation. Because I started seeing this in the middle of the pandemic, and I was the High Flex Fellow at PIMA at the time, I actually started implementing these things into my course. So one of them was a student High Flex participation policy. I'm actually going to read this to you because when you see the other one, you're like, oh yeah, that's why she did it that way. So this was for my African American Studies 120 course. And on the syllabus, there's a participation statement that is pretty general to the college. In this one, I just wrote down participation is expected throughout the course end date. This course will be delivered in a high flex modality. This means that even if you cannot make the live sessions, you can complete this course as a fully online course with no penalty. Attendance will be taken using the high flex quiz for online participants. For students that are electing to complete this course using the online modality, please note that you can reach out for additional support with the learning activities and assignments. Let me push pause here really quickly. As a result of this policy, I moved from having these things called office hours to open hours, where students actually, or learners actually had, at the time, my personal cell phone. I have since moved away from this, and now I have a work cell phone, but you can also duplicate this with a Google voice phone. They could text me at any time. It would come directly to my phone. All materials, including lectures, will be made available for all students, regardless of the participation modality. And then here is this part. Life is already hard. Please do not suffer in silence. Let's work together to earn the grade that you want in this class, right? So this is a shifting that language from, it's your responsibility. You do it. I have 3 degrees already. I already got my degree, to a measure of grace, right? And so what ended up happening is we have this learner participation tree. This figure is directly out of Kevin Beatty's High Flex book. But what I found in implementing this is learners exhibited greater learning autonomy, meaning if they got to choose, they took ownership of that choice. And that meant a reduction in learner absenteeism. So the amount of time that I would take on reteaching or sitting with the student, that significantly reduced. Learners respond better when they aren't stressed. So if they were sick, I'd be like, please stay home, please, and rest. And I think in some instances, I can name 4 where I actually said to the student who came to class sick because they were concerned about they would get put out of the class because of administrative drop policies, please go home. You are not your best self and you cannot support the community this way. This is how we're going to support you. I also found out just as an instructor that grace costs us nothing at all. Once you close that door, you make the rules. Your learning community makes the rules. So is there another way that you can do this assignment? Can I move this due date back? Grace cost us nothing. And because I am so keenly aware of how much grace I needed, it was easier for me to give this to students. Additionally, implementing this also reduced institutional barriers. So students who needed courses to graduate but couldn't take them during the same time could sign up for my course, and they'd say, I can't make it to class today. I was like, oh, that's not an excuse. You can complete this class 100% online. It's designed for you to be able to do this. The thing that kind of freaked students out the most was they thought they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so Kevin is going to show you a high flex policy example. I had to move from this statement on the syllabus to actually doing it as an FAQ. So the policy is written as an FAQ. And even then, it took maybe 7 weeks into a 16-week course for students to actually believe that when I said, I'm here to support you, believe me when I tell you this, it will be fine. You do not have to show up to class. You can complete it online. It took about 7 weeks for them to kind of work through that. So what else do I want to tell you? Okay, so here's where I'm going to end. Multimodal courses are deceptively simplistic, right? So it looks like I just was like, oh, they did all this stuff and it was great. Don't worry about it. It was wonderful. No, it takes a lot of practice, a lot of learning, a lot of alignment, a lot of training. And so if you get Beatty's book, Dr. Beatty's book, this is the first thing that they tell you. And he's not lying. Best practices could uphold barriers for learners, so be on the lookout for that. Learner choice often means providing learners with their right to fail. And if you are the type of instructor that I am, like no one has to fail, this can be very hard, very, very hard. This practice may not be the best for you. It may not be a great fit, and that's okay. And if you can't implement it all, just implement one thing. But bar none, this is about teaching first. So if your pedagogy is weak, so will your multimodal course. Other than that, if you want to contact me, here's my contact information. And I believe there's a contact page there as well, but I'm open to questions if you have any.
Well, while people gather their thoughts and their questions, Treya, thank you so much. This was an amazing session. I think, and you're welcome to swap out the slides, but I don't know if there is going to make that big of a difference because you expanded on what's in the deck, right? You shared the personal experiences from the student and the instructor side, and that's what we need to be considering as we go through this process as instructors, as you say, but also as people who support instructors like Cheryl in the room and others who maybe work for academic technology or Center for Teaching and Learning or information technology units or disability services, you name it. There's a whole group of people who are supporting learners and instructors. And then there are the campus leaders, those who are making decisions, those who are purchasing technologies, those who are setting policies. So there's a whole group of people that I wish we can make sure they get the recording to this session because there's just so much to think about. So thank you for getting us started. Any questions from the room? I see a thumbs up from Cheryl. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording, but it doesn't mean we have to stop answering questions. We're going to start thinking about transitioning to our next session. But before we do, a couple last minute announcements. One, this session will be posted on our YouTube playlist after we are able to edit the captions. So I put that playlist in the chat for you. And because we have more sessions in the next time slot, our last time slot of the day, I'm putting our program at a glance in the chat so you can see what's coming up. And then for those folks who are on social media and want to connect with different people from the Peralta team, Treya put her contact info up on her slide. I'll put that there as well. So thank you, Treya. Thank you all for the contributions to the chat. The activities really made me think about not only what does multimodal mean, but how do we help students succeed in that environment? So thank you all.